Hello horror movie lovers, I'm Trenton and I love movies just like you, obviously. So I watched Opera because my expectations were neutral, leaning towards high. Dario Argento, Giallo, the poster, love all of it. Didn't watch a trailer or read a synopsis, so I pretty much went in blind when it came to what the movie was exactly going to be. But did the movie meet my expectations? No. Whoa. Wow, this was a huge disappointment. The movie had so much going for it, but there are some very distracting technical issues that the movie has that prevented me from fully getting invested, unfortunately. To the point where I couldn't even finish the movie. I stopped right at the killer reveal and was like, no, this was actually a waste of time.
So everyone's entitled to one good scare.
A young operata is stalked by a deranged fan bent on killing the people associated with her to claim her for himself. The first third of this video will be spoiler free, then the last 2/3 will contain spoilers. Don't worry, I will give you a warning before we enter spoiler territory. There's literally only one character. Obviously, she's not the only person in the movie. I mean, she's the only important character. Betty is boring. There is not a single aspect about her character that's interesting. Not a single thing. Not even surface level interesting. Nothing. I normally don't point out acting in my videos because I don't like critiquing people's acting abilities unless it's noticeably bad or noticeably good. And in this case, it was quite bad and confusing at times. Some characters would act in a way that felt out of place for the predicament that said character was in. It was confusing. The story is pretty much your straightforward slasher. I like the story itself. I love slashers, favorite subgenre of horror, but the writing on the other hand is one of the many flaws that the movie has. The main character is so stupid, it's frustrating. Like, she makes possibly some of the worst decisions imaginable while being targeted by a killer. Like, what the are you doing? I obviously can't be specific in the non-spoiler section, but I'll specify in the spoiler section. The cinematography is great. I mean, the movie is a giallo, very over the top and not for everyone, but I enjoyed the movie visually. There are a lot of shots in the movie that I do like. What else is there to say regarding the cinematography? I mean, it was great, which is to be expected from a Dario Argento film. His movies are always great stylistically, visually, etc. At least from the ones that I've seen. The editing is bad. The type of bad where it's extremely noticeable and distracting. Continuity is just non-existent in this movie. The editing itself isn't bad for the entire duration, but there is some laughably bad editing moments. Like, a character could get hit with an object while standing, the object will fall to the floor, then the character will fall to the floor, but the object will fall to the floor again. It's minor continuity errors like this that don't ruin the story entirely, but ruin the immersion and tension. The dubbing is also bad. It's very inconsistent and off. That's the main aspect that really prevented me from fully getting invested in the movie. The words themselves match, but the cadence at times didn't match with the actors' mouths. A character could be audibly yelling, but visually it wouldn't look like they were yelling. It was so distracting and I couldn't get past it. The effects were great. Again, it's giallo, it's over the top, not for everyone, but I will say that I did like them. All practical, which is always appreciated. Even though the setup for some of the kills were quite stupid and annoying, one in particular comes to mind, but the effects themselves were great. The tone isn't lighthearted, obviously. It's a serious slasher movie, but the movie isn't as dark as I was expecting it to be. Tying the main character down and forcing her to watch people close to her get killed is dark in itself, but the editing and not so good dubbing, again, fully takes me out of the immersion, therefore interfering with me feeling the terror and suspense of the events that take place. I honestly couldn't tell you if the movie felt slow or not due to me not being able to watch the whole movie in one sitting. It took me 4 nights to get to the last 20 minutes before just completely giving up on the movie entirely. And the movie is only around an hour 45 minutes, and that's coming from someone with a high attention span. Again, I just couldn't fully get into the movie due to the poor dubbing. I'm gonna try to make that the last time I mention the dubbing. Y'all get the point. The life lesson that I learned after watching Opera was that some movies would definitely benefit from a remake. Overall, yeah, I couldn't get into the movie unfortunately due to the reason that I kept mentioning that I will try not to mention again. I really do wish that this movie gets a remake because the wasted potential is really unfortunate. I'm gonna give Opera a 4 out of 10. Only reason it's not lower is because I did enjoy some scenes, the giallo aspect, and the atmosphere as a whole. We are now entering spoiler territory. If you haven't seen Opera, watch it, then come back to the video, or if you simply don't care about spoilers, keep on watching. In this portion of the video, I break down the movie, go more in depth with my likes and dislikes, as well as my favorite scene, least favorite scene, favorite kill and least favorite kill. Again, we are now entering spoiler territory. When Mala Shakova, the star of an avant-garde production of Verdi's Macbeth at the Parma Opera House, is injured after getting hit by a car outside the theater during an argument with the director, Chakova's young understudy, Betty, is given the role of Lady Macbeth. Despite her initial apprehension, Betty's performance proves a success. However, an anonymous figure finds his way into the opera house on the opening night, watching Betty's performance from an empty box. When a stagehand finds him, the figure murders him against the coat hook. While at her boyfriend Stefano's apartment, the unseen assailant breaks in and overpowers Betty. He gags her with tape, ties her to a pillar, and forces her to watch him kill Stefano, taping a row of needles beneath her eyes to ensure she sees his death. Afterwards, the masked killer unties Betty and flees the apartment. Betty chooses not to go to the police and instead confides in her director, Marco, that the killer may know her. I swear, Betty makes the stupidest decisions imaginable. You confide in your director instead of the police after you were forced to watch someone close to you get murdered. Literally, what sense does that make? I am so confused. Like, what? She's stupid. The next day, Inspector Alan Santini questions the opera house staff about Stefano's murder, as well as an attack on the production's pet ravens, 3 of which were found dead after the show. Later that day, after Betty's costume is found slashed to ribbons, Betty meets with the wardrobe seamstress, Julia. While repairing the dress, Julia finds a gold bracelet with an anniversary date sewn onto it. The killer soon intervenes, again restraining Betty and taping needles under her eyes. He stabs Julia, who swallows the bracelet, prompting him to cut her throat open to retrieve it. The assailant unties Betty and flees once again. This entire scene was so odd. I'm going to explain why I think that after the breakdown, but it just didn't make sense. It was really stupid, and once again, Betty being an absolute idiot. How the hell does this keep happening to her? The first time it happened, I understand, but for it to happen to her again? Like, are you just not aware of your surroundings? Why are you constantly letting your guard down knowing that someone is after you? There is no reason that this should keep happening to her. Like, at this point, you should be fully alert, aware of your surroundings, and stick with a group of people in public or just stay in public. Not wandering around by yourself knowing that you're being targeted. There's no excuse. You are in the city, not a secluded area. When Betty returns to her apartment, she comes across Santini, who promises to send Betty a detective to keep guard over her. A man identifying himself as Inspector Suavi arrives to look after her. Later, Betty's agent Mita arrives and tells Betty that she talked with a man in the lobby claiming to be Suavi. Unsure which is the imposter, Betty and Mita hide while the figure claiming to be Suavi receives a phone call and leaves. Mita answers a knock at the door and demands the visitor identify himself. As she looks through the peephole, she is fatally shot. After the killer breaks in and Betty comes across a mortally wounded Suavi, Betty escapes through a ventilation shaft with the help of a girl living in a neighboring apartment. Betty returns to the opera house and meets with Marco, who tells her he has a plan to identify the killer. The following night, Betty again takes the stage as Lady Macbeth. During the performance, Marco unleashes a flock of ravens into the audience, recognizing the face of their attacker from the previous night. The birds swoop down on him, gouging out one of his eyes. The murderer, revealed to be Santini, attempts to shoot at Betty. Santini evades capture and abducts Betty from her dressing room, dragging her to another room. Santini reveals that he was once the teenage lover of Betty's mother and murdered young women at her behest, but killed the mother due to her escalating demands. Betty witnessed the murder from behind a partly open door. Now, years later, Santini's desire to kill has been rekindled by Betty's appearance, which he sees as her mother's reincarnation. Blindfolding Betty and tying her to a chair, Santini stages his own death by setting fire to the room and apparently himself. Betty breaks free and escapes. Betty and Marco leave Rome, traveling to Marco's house in the Swiss Alps. However, when Marco hears a television broadcast that the man thought to have been burned alive was not Santini, but a clothed mannequin, he yells for Betty to flee. Betty runs into the nearby woods with Santini in pursuit. Marco tackles him, only to be stabbed to death. Betty distracts Santini long enough to bash him on the head with a rock, after which the police arrive to take him away. Betty wanders through an empty meadow, finding a lizard trapped in the grass. Betty frees it and tells it to go free. Then the movie ends. This movie is certainly flawed, but the scene with the seamstress especially sticks out to me. I'm only going to talk about this scene in the story and writing spoiler portion of the video because I don't want to spend 20 minutes ranting about every scene that I dislike. This scene was just odd. You see Betty tied up in a glass box, just stand there looking at her, get attacked by the killer, drop the random bracelet that you found. The killer goes to pick up the bracelet, you get the bracelet before he can, smiling like this is some sort of game or some shit. Try to run away with it, the killer throws throws an iron at your back, causing you to fall to the ground. You give the necklace to the killer. You just lay there for some reason. You pick up the iron that he threw at you, knock the killer across the head with it, get the necklace back, go to unmask the killer, which was smart, but you just stare at him in awe instead of going to help Betty, who is still tied up, and you take forever to tell her who the killer is. Like, why not just say who it is right as you unmasked him? But she doesn't, giving the killer enough time to wake up, strangle her, and stab her to death with some scissors. Maybe the seamstress was on drugs or something. That's the only logical explanation for her stupidity. The scene with the seamstress. Again, the editing. What was going on in the editing room? Like I said in the non-spoiler section, the editing and dubbing were bad, but the most noticeable example of just bad editing was this scene. This was the scene that I was referencing. The killer chucked an iron at her while she was running away. The iron fell to the floor, then she fell to the floor, but the iron fell to the floor again. Like, what? That's unacceptable. When it comes to bad dubbing, the moment that sticks out the most to me was the scene where her agent came to her apartment.
I'm getting worse. Keep your voice down.
Is someone here?
Yes! Vienna and Paris.
Like, come on now. Y'all see what I'm talking about. There are other moments throughout the movie that have that same issue, but this one in particular was the most distracting. Distracting to the point where I had to rewind it to make sure I wasn't hearing and seeing shit. Like, that did not match. My favorite scene would definitely have to be the peephole scene. Honestly, the entire scene involving her agent in her apartment, besides the bad dubbing moment, was great and quite suspenseful. Her agent looking through the peephole, not being sure if it's the killer at the door or the man sent to watch over Betty, and the killer just shooting through the people after showing the ID. Like, that is traumatic as f. That was already an irrational fear of mine, and this movie did not help with that. How many times have I mentioned that scene? I do not know, but just everything about that scene was frustrating, narratively and technically. My favorite kill would have to be Stefano's death. This is the first instance involving the killer restraining Betty and forcing her to watch him kill, and I feel it set the bar pretty high. Stefano walking back into the room, seeing Betty tied to a pillar with those flimsy looking eye trap thingies, and before he can help her, the killer coming from behind the pillar and repeatedly stabbing him through the jaw into his mouth and repeatedly in the chest, hands, and face. I was really tempted to put this scene as my favorite because I actually really did like it, but when it comes to memorability, the peephole scene was just way more memorable. If I did an honorable mention section, this scene would definitely be runner-up for my favorite scene. My least favorite kill would probably have to be the seamstress's death. The death itself was fine, but the lead up to the death was so frustrating and stupid. Frustratingly stupid and idiotic. It was definitely the most easily avoidable death in the entire movie, and that's why it's my least favorite. If you did enjoy this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more videos from me, and make sure to hit that notification bell so you'll be notified whenever I post a new video. Alright, horror movie lovers, I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace out.